Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. We're looking at the 2026 World AI Conference, where global leaders actually got together and promised this incredible, genuinely utopian vision of a new era of shared prosperity. Sounds amazing, right? But today, we're really focusing on the shadows behind that bright light. We're going to explore a massive historical pattern, why human progress almost always seems to create completely new forms of dependency. To get the full picture, you really have to grasp the sheer scale of the promises made over in Shanghai. President Xi Jinping went all in on AI for good. And, it wasn't just empty words. China backed this up with massive commitments in their 15th five-year plan, literally announcing 5,000 AI training opportunities specifically aimed at developing nations, plus the creation of new international AI application centers. The narrative they were pushing was absolutely clear. AI is a rising tide, and it's going to lift all boats. And that soaring optimism, it was totally echoed across the global stage. You had UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres stressing that a technology shaping humanity's future actually has to be shaped by all of humanity. We even saw leaders like Cambodia's Prime Minister Hun Manet stepping up to reinforce this, focusing super intensely on bridging the digital divide so that no nation gets left behind in this whole AI revolution. Now, the economic gravity behind all these promises is just staggering. $5 trillion. During the conference, Kazakhstan's President Tokayev brought up UN data projecting a $5 trillion global AI market by 2033. To put that into perspective, he made a crucial point. AI isn't just a neat piece of tech anymore. It's rapidly becoming a full-fledged global infrastructure, kind of like the electrical grid or the highway system, that's going to completely dictate the future of our economies and global connectivity. So that brings us to part one, the paradox of progress, when protection becomes control. While those 2026 promises are definitely breathtaking, we really need to face a pretty sobering historical reality. Which brings us to the core focus of our explainer today, the paradox of progress. It's this deeply embedded historical pattern. An initiative starts out with a noble promise, protection, liberation, prosperity, and hey, it might even deliver massive real-world benefits. But gradually, almost invisibly, it gets absorbed into a much larger architecture of bureaucracy, commercial power, or control. Essentially, the very systems built to protect us eventually make us completely dependent on them. Moving on to part two, history's new dependencies, echoes of the past. Look, if we don't understand the past, we literally cannot map out the future of AI. There's this relentless historical drumbeat of massive systemic shifts. Think about it. In the 1940s, the welfare state promised protection from poverty. Fast forward to the 1960s, the Green Revolution promised to protect us from global famine. The 1990s, the internet promised open, decentralized information. And now, the 2020s, AI is promising unprecedented efficiency and shared global prosperity. Every single one of these eras promised us a new form of liberation. But here's the catch. The trap is incredibly consistent. Take the Green Revolution. It was a literal miracle that prevented mass famine. Nobody denies its achievements. But the actual dependency it created, it trapped farmers into having to buy specialized seeds, chemical fertilizers, and pesticides from massive multinational corporations, basically stripping away local food sovereignty. Same with the internet. It promised decentralization, but actually birthed these massive digital empires and centralized surveillance. Even the welfare state brought genuine security, but tied that assistance to rigid bureaucratic monitoring and compliance. Progress always seems to carry a hidden price tag of reliance. The source material even applies this pattern to major social shifts. For example, women's emancipation undeniably brought essential, hard-won freedoms, legal equality, education, and economic independence. But it's fascinating to neutrally look at how the economic system adapted to that over time. Housing prices and essential expenses essentially adjusted to absorb two incomes. So what started as the incredible freedom to work evolved for a lot of families into a strict economic necessity for both parents to work. And this dynamic naturally shifted child-rearing further away from the family unit and more into the hands of institutions, schools, and digital platforms. Liberation in one area ended up creating a brand new dependency in another. And when we become completely dependent on these massive institutional infrastructures, things can go terribly wrong. The text points to a really chilling anecdote, the Dutch childcare benefit scandal. Here you have a system explicitly built to support families with subsidies, and it completely turned against them. Why? Because automated algorithms and aggressive fraud prevention completely replaced basic human judgment. Institutional self-protection took over, treating everyday honest citizens as potential fraudsters. It's literally a textbook example of a protective system morphing into an architecture of control. All right, let's dive into part 3, the AI infrastructure trap, the mandatory assistant. Bringing this whole historical pattern directly back to the present day, AI starts out innocently enough, right? We introduce it for convenience, for efficiency, just to handle our boring, repetitive tasks. But as it scales up, it risks automating existing prejudices and centralizing huge amounts of knowledge. The real danger zone is when it evolves from a helpful little assistant into a mandatory infrastructure. Seriously, imagine a near future where applying for a job, getting healthcare, or even just accessing your bank account is literally impossible without passing through an AI gatekeeper, one that you can't even inspect or challenge. Which brings us to this really chilling realization from the text. The greatest danger might not be a suddenly hostile machine. It might actually be a helpful system that becomes so deeply embedded in human civilization that participation is no longer genuinely optional. So, the real threat of artificial general intelligence isn't some sci-fi Terminator kicking down your door. No, it's a soft, invisible cage of absolute, unavoidable dependency. And honestly, we can already see the cracks in that utopian vision of shared prosperity we talked about at the start. UN Secretary General Guterres issued a really stark warning about this imbalance. He pointed out that we have hundreds of billions of dollars in private AI wealth concentrating at the very top, while the investment actually reaching developing nations is just a tiny trickle. I mean, 1/3 of humanity is still entirely offline. The infrastructure is absolutely being built, but the power and the wealth are consolidating at lightning speed. Let's look at part 4. Who controls the future? The architecture of power. If AI is destined to become this unavoidable, mandatory infrastructure for civilization, we have to objectively examine who actually controls the underlying architecture of all this power. The source text warns heavily of institutional capture. Neutrally reporting on this, it points out that behind all those public declarations of peace and prosperity, the military-industrial complex and global intelligence agencies view AI very differently. To them, advanced AI is the strategic nervous system of the 21st century. It's an architecture explicitly designed for cyber warfare, for mapping civilian populations, predicting political behavior, and achieving absolute military superiority. So there's this massive divide. On one side, you have the utopian facade presented on the global stage. Instruments of peace, closing the digital divide, shared global governance, all that good stuff. But on the other side, the documented strategic reality of defense contractors and intelligence services. We're talking autonomous weapons, total information control, and massive intelligence analysis. The public promise is liberation, but the private reality looks a whole lot like control. The text also reminds us that we really have to investigate who holds the purse strings, much like how historians examine the influence of immense wealth networks over time. It specifically mentions families like the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. But, and this is absolutely crucial, it makes a very careful distinction. Their historical influence has to be analyzed strictly through verifiable financial architecture. We're talking ownership, investments, board memberships, and contracts. It firmly rejects attributing power to any religious or ethnic identity, warning us that actual control has to be proven through documented institutional relationships, not conspiracy theories. At the end of the day, power is about who owns the infrastructure. Which leads us directly to the most vital, unanswered questions of our time. Think about these for a second. Who finances the AI infrastructure? Who actually owns the massive computing power and the staggering energy supply required to run it? Who controls the training data that shapes its reality? Who writes the international standards? And perhaps most importantly, who actually has the power to interrupt or deactivate these models? By not having clear answers to these questions, humanity is basically handing over its sovereignty to entirely unaccountable systems. So, we're going to end this explainer with a pretty stark question. From the welfare state to the Green Revolution to the internet, we've seen exactly how progress creates new dependency. As we build out this completely unavoidable digital infrastructure, will the next great promise of human progress simply become the most powerful architecture of control ever created? A forewarned humanity is a forearmed humanity. Definitely something to think about the next time you interact with your AI assistant. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the architecture around you.